Swinburne University of Technology.
Hi students, welcome to another talk for the PhD Hub, where we're going to be talking through some of the aspects of writing a PhD. Now today I'm joined by Bruno Mascitelli, who is a Associate Professor in European Studies. So Bruno, thanks for coming in to share your expertise. Now Bruno has had extensive experience in supervising students through the PhD process, and so I thought we might just start by asking what would you say are some general advice you would normally give to PhD students who are just beginning their PhD, or even just putting their first research proposal together?
I think, in summary, a good approach for new students that are just starting the journey of the PhD is be modest, but be assertive. Become familiar with the literature that is involved in the particular area they might be pursuing, and towards the end of the journey, there'll be a sense of confidence that if they've made their contribution to knowledge, they'll be able to assert some kind of this is my contribution, and to be pretty proud of it too.
Great, yep, yeah. So what fields do you have experience in supervising in terms of study and research?
The area of migration, European studies and Italian politics are the three areas that have been sort of tackled with students that I've had in the past few years. In particular, students who may wish to come from Italy to enrol in a PhD in Australia, and many of them come with themes that they'd like to pursue. They're rather surprised that they have such liberty in Australia to be able to choose topics that are more to their liking, rather than being sort of forced to pursue a particular theme.
Great. So there are some real challenges and there are some real advantages, I suppose, to pursuing a PhD in Australia as an international student. What would you say are some of the particular challenges that you've seen students face when they're coming from another country?
Yeah, there are challenges. The system is very different. Even the relationship with their professors is the first starting point. They find troubling the issue related to the informality, referring to me in my first name, and not using the formal language in addressing their professors. But I think the biggest challenge that they probably have is tackling and engaging with academic English in producing a proper and a nice verse of or narrative, which then becomes their PhD. So I think the language, more in the sophisticated articulation of it, can be one of the main issues they need to tackle.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, adapting to academic English is something that even local students have difficulty with sometimes. So I thought maybe we could talk perhaps about the writing style of the PhD. What do you look for in a good piece of academic writing?
Particularly when you're dealing with Italian background students, they have a very flowery discourse. It may take one paragraph to say what probably in English we would do in two lines.
I know plenty of local students who have that same problem as well occasionally.
So to not feel concerned that simplicity is some kind of tragedy or error, that tends to be one of the biggest difficulties that they have to challenge and that they have to confront. And I think once they master that, there is a greater sense of ability to communicate the sophisticated ideas and thoughts that they have, which at the beginning might be quite difficult.
So often I think for complex ideas, simple sentences are usually the best approach.
Yes, I think that's one of my main points to the students, and sometimes it can even be with English mother tongue students as well.
So thinking beyond just say the style of the PhD, how do you have any advice for students in terms of structuring their argument over a book-length manuscript, which many of them may be writing for the first time? How would you normally break it down into sections I suppose it varies between every project, of course, but is there any general advice you could give?
I think one of the biggest challenges that the students coming, particularly say from Europe or Italy, may have to confront is the conceptual framework of the PhD, and that is the overall roadmap, if you want, and how you're going to identifying what the issue might be, what the problem might be, having familiarity with what has been set up until you arrived on the scene, and how you're going to articulate the resolution of whatever that particular problem might be. That structure tends to be a little different from what they're used to. They also come from a background where a verbal defence is obligatory, and we don't have that, certainly not across the board. And so the whole narrative, the whole PhD journey is encapsulated in a dissertation. And that transmission is actually rather important and quite difficult, actually.
So there's a very strong writing focus in the Australian PhD. It's about the manuscript at the end of the day.
That's correct.
So because students who may be watching this might be tossing up, where to study anywhere in the world potentially, how would you say the European model of PhD works, or how is it different from the Australian PhD?
There is a greater level of independence in Europe. There will also be some more classwork or coursework. There is a little bit more detachment from the supervisor, so you may go for longer periods and less attention. I think most tend to like our system. Possibly we might be a bit more and a bit too much interventionist at times. I certainly don't think that's the case, but it may be interpreted like that. And I do have I do prefer a micro supervision management of it. And generally I find the students actually feel quite comfortable with that, that there is this ongoing attention that's being given. And of course, to allow opportunities for the student to get their thoughts out. So whether it's through conferences or journal articles along the journey, I think that's important. They need to see the connection to the real world and not just locked up within a dissertation.
So thinking perhaps again about the conferences, publications, things that students can do as part of their development along the PhD journey that aren't just confined to the dissertation and their relationship with their supervisor. What do you think? What are some key achievements or accomplishments you think PhD students should aspire to over the course of their candidature beyond just writing the thesis itself?
I think getting their particular contribution out to the real world, to the public, to the other academics and scholars, and laying the basis for their potential contribution themselves as future employment with an academic institution or other, or government, whichever is appropriate for their interests. So I think that sense of, yes, it is can be quite a journey which is locked up in literature, but you really must get out there and argue your point and show that what your contribution was is very relevant to the future of knowledge.
That's right. I've seen with a lot of PhD students, both from my peers and occasionally people I've supervised, it can be quite a difficult balance between enough focus on the dissertation and enough focus on the career development elements. I mean, you focus too much on one and you lose the other a lot of the time. So
I fully agree with that, and I tend to be a little concerned when the students, especially they get towards the end of their journey, clearly they all have a life, and they need to find a point of where they want to be after the journey, and if we don't deal with it, we actually see the student can become concerned about it in the latter period of their PhD. There may be issues of economy and personal matters in their life and things of that kind, and I think you do need to have a sort of a holistic view on this. You cannot just sort of act as though that's not part of your duty of care.
Good. Now, of course, we have quite a strict timeline for the PhD now, with the 3.5 year mark, which can be 3.5 years is considered the ideal time frame for a PhD. What are some of the best ways for a student to keep on track with that deadline? As it can seem like a very long stretch at the beginning, but the time just goes so quickly, I think, over the course of the candidature.
Look, I think that the issue of the issue of a 3 or 4 year or 3.5 year is, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. There may have developed a kind of a student culture which is, oh, don't worry, it'll be 4 years, but I'm finding that a number of students quite correctly want to get on with their life, and so 3 years sounds, or 3.5 years sounds perfectly doable. the relationship with the topic is always a difficult one, and at a certain point you do need to move on.
Yeah.
You feel you may have exhausted what you wanted to do and say, and find some other activity in your life, or even move on with the same topic and publish and do other forms of communicating the contents of the study. So I don't think that really should be an issue. I think if we do pursue the more stricter timing, I think that's actually a better form of discipline. And possibly the supervisor needs to ensure that, of course, for the student it can seem like a non-quantifiable time, but there has to be a sense of discipline and sort of deadlines and achievements and watersheds where a PhD needs to have those points where you can then close and move on and close and move on.
Yep. So probably getting into a routine of regularly submitting written work to the supervisor,
Correct.
making sure they're on regular meetings, holding your supervisor to the meetings as well, as it can be important sometimes.
Couldn't agree anymore. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we are part of, we should be part of the solution, not the problem.
Yeah.
And so the discipline that comes into the relationship, I think, is very important.
Yeah. Now, one thing I did want to talk to you about is a PhD should ideally make an original contribution to the scholarship within the field within which it's situated. And of course, it can be a lot of students identify an area of interest that they want to pursue at the start of the PhD, but finding a way of making that original contribution can be quite challenging in the course of the candidature. So, I mean, could we start by talking maybe about how an original contribution to knowledge within a scholarly field can be defined?
That's a very good point, because we all struggle with it, and yet it's a requirement that whenever you are presenting to your faculty or a panel of feedback, we're always seeking to understand both where the gap in the literature is, and of course, which is often the same thing as your contribution to knowledge. I tend to find that towards the end of the PhD, it becomes very clear.
Yeah.
It may not be clear at the beginning. And while you may search for some kind of contribution, often it comes more naturally than what you think. Generally after you've collected your data, where it becomes very clear where your contribution will be. And in particular, the ability of the student to analyse what they have. They often have findings from their data which are often not clear at first, and then as they think and work through it, they actually find, oh, this is actually original, this is very different, this is, and probably never saw it earlier on. So I think the data collection has to be part of that journey to get to the contribution. Yeah,
great. And of course, I mean, as you mentioned before, it's about finding a kind of the gap, identifying the need for the research as well.
That's correct, which can be hard at the beginning, you're right. And I think it may be a little unfair to expect an articulated response to the contribution to knowledge, because if you do have that sense of modesty, there's often a lot of material out there that you just simply haven't had the opportunity to consult. And in doing so, you then refine exactly what you have contributed or what you could contribute to knowledge in that particular field.
Yeah, great. So I thought we might just close up by, are there any particular pitfalls that we haven't identified as of yet that you would like students who are either starting out or substantially into their candidature to ideally avoid while completing their PhD?
I think there are two areas that I sort of in my mind stick out from where possibly we could have done a little better. And one is the protracted period of literature reading and so on, which sometimes can be a bit too much, because a lot of the literature you read through the journey of the PhD. So there often isn't a point at which you can say, well, it's complete, it's ongoing. The other area I think is the ability to have a more systemic way in which students and supervisors can work together. It's occurred to me that relationship is pretty critical. And I think we need ways in which students can assert their rights and expect from supervision that the answer that people don't have time is just not good enough. And so it tends to be an issue on our side, I would say, where we need to rectify that. Now, whether that should be done with rules and number of supervisions and things of that kind, I'm not sure that that's the way forward. But that needs to be addressed, because I find that the relationship between the supervision team, not just the supervisor, but the supervision team and the student tends to be pretty important in my experience.
And often students will have different supervisory needs depending on where they are in their life, and the supervisory team needs to adapt to that a little bit.
Absolutely. And so the task is a lot more involving than I'd originally thought, and you have a sense of belonging. You can't extricate yourself from that particular student study, which you feel is yours as well.
Yeah, really is. Yeah, great. I mean, I would just like to jump back to the idea about the literature review as a kind of a challenging area for students, as I know a lot of students come into the PhD and really feel that. And they can't even begin to write until they've completely absorbed this vast body of literature and familiarised themselves with everything. And I have students who start reading through, say, the history of even literary criticism systematically. And obviously they can't do that because there just isn't enough time, and they can't cover everything in their literature review. How would you advise students to structure their reading as they start to approach this task?
I think we probably expect too much when an application is submitted, and in reality, whoever the incumbent HDR student is would not have been able to have done enough reading to get a good sense of the topic, and my understanding is that we seem to have an appreciation of that difficulty. I think that a shorter period of time where there's a kind of very intense reading, enough to feel that you're starting to master at least the past, meaning up until you arrived, what were they saying on this theme? And then a ongoing literature review will be maintained, and not to be too concerned that you're not quite, on top of all the literature. I think this fear of being on top of the literature is a bit of a false problem, in my view. And it's funny how when you start to collect your data, how you kind of put literature in its right context, that you're now looking at the future. You're now looking at the literature connected to what would otherwise be future literature, let's say. So I think it's that sense of the PhD journey is a little bit of a tunnel, often without a light, and you're not too sure at what point you feel you've done enough, that you've done an adequate amount of the literature. And my view is that you probably never have that. And I mean, I just think of when you do readings in areas which may cover many languages. I mean, there are many topics. Migration is one of them. I mean, have I ever done a literature reading of Arabic or German or Russian? Not to mention many of the Asian languages in the area of migration. Of course, I can't. So we all have to have that sense of proportion, that we will read or get an idea of the literature that covers this area, but it's never exhaustive. It just can't be.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, thanks, Bruno. I think that's a good point to end on. So thanks for coming and sharing your expertise, and thank you all. We'll see you for another talk next time.
This has been a Swinburne production.